This presentation is Managing Privacy Risks with Privacy Impact Assessments. SAM policy has clarified the need to develop new methods and tools to manage privacy risks. Privacy risk management is not new, but with the clarification to policy in 2013, it brought up questions regarding potential gaps state entities are struggling with within the privacy risk management area today. Definitions are good. So in this particular sense, the way the state of California defines privacy is informational privacy. Privacy about information or data elements, and there'll be more to come on this. Broad definition allows for the methodology to be used across all processes in an organization. So a PIA can be utilized for processes, programs, and projects. It's not just about information systems. The key points are that it can be a methodology, but it can also be a tool. So advantages of using PIAs are PIAs and using repeatable processes to manage privacy risks have other benefits besides risk reduction. You identify where your personally identifiable information, PII, is being processed, or if it's being processed in new ways. You educate your stakeholders and business partners and increase the awareness of the proper use and handling of PII. In doing so, new relationships are built and strengthened, and privacy education and expertise is spread throughout the organization. In addition, if something should go wrong, you are able to go back to your processes and methodologies to make targeted improvements and validate what is working properly. So, who's impacted by privacy risks? Who is harmed when a privacy breach happens? It's not just the customer or the individual whose information has been inappropriately accessed. The organization can experience reputational and brand harm in the form of negative publicity. In some cases, there are fines and lawsuits associated with privacy missteps, and in the very least, there are costs associated with responding to privacy incidents, such as credit protection services, costs for affected individuals, costs associated with notifying and responding to questions surrounding the incident. Business partner relationships suffer as a result of privacy breaches, and more restrictive contractual clauses surrounding informational use can result. And lastly, more legislative scrutiny, which can lead to additional regulatory actions or more laws can occur. And this can result because of these privacy breaches. Now we can talk about some privacy fails that we've seen in the news on a regular basis. Some of the ones that have been in the news that I want to bring to your attention from 2014 and 15 have a Federal Trade Commission settlement involvement. The entities likely thought that they were in compliance with security standards, but still had breaches. Not that they weren't concerned with privacy when they were creating new systems, but perhaps they haven't spent enough time on privacy impact assessments to assess those privacy risks. What does privacy management look like? We're going to assume that most of you are familiar with risk management methodologies. This class is not to talk about risk management, although it plays a basic underlying education surrounding privacy impact assessments. Privacy risk management looks a lot like other methodologies and risk management models, and this particular graphic came from the Information and Privacy Commissioner in Ontario, Canada. They've done a lot of work on privacy impact assessments and managing privacy risk. I'm not going to go through the whole phases with you. Glance at it, and if you're familiar with risk management, it looks pretty familiar. What's different about privacy risk management than general risk management methodologies, I would say for the most part, is that we're mostly dealing with informational privacy, which is what the state's definition of privacy talked about earlier in this session. Here we're focusing in on PII, which is personally identifiable information. PII is information that identifies an individual or can be reasonably linked to an individual and to those particular data elements. So for the most part, when we're looking at PIAs here at the state, we're dealing with PII and identifying certain types of data elements, and that's where it's a little bit different. from other types of risk management. So we're looking at a combination of areas, and so that's the piece that's different. Education is a big part of the PIA process. Again, this is an overview and is not designed to talk about risk management outside of the context of privacy. As we move ahead and talk a little bit more about risk management, because it wouldn't be fair to talk a lot about risks and not tell you what they are. I've noticed that people get vulnerabilities and risks mixed up. What is the difference and what are they? And so starting at the bottom of this definition on this slide, a vulnerability is a weakness most likely in an information system, but then a risk is a combination of things so that the risk is the likelihood or probability that a loss of information, assets, or breach of security will occur. So that's the top definition. So this goes back to our SAM definitions as well. We tried to make this as relevant to this date as possible, but vulnerabilities are only one factor that gets calculated into identifying a risk. You need to be thinking about your threats, the likelihood of the occurrence, the probable loss, or consequence, which in this case, in privacy, would be harms to individuals or harms to the organization or the risk appetite of the organization. All those factors go into identifying what are your risks. An example of a vulnerability is an unpatched server where PII is stored. A risk is that a bad actor could exploit that weakness that results from the server not being patched and gaining unauthorized access to the PII. So when you're looking to start this process, it's a matter of taking baby steps. You're probably asking yourself, where do I start? Well, you want to insert your methodology into existing processes, whether you have them in projects or other program areas. Do you really want to create a new standalone process? Because you will have to be looking at other areas. But some of the areas that you might want to look at are strategic plans, roadmaps, FSRs, and legislation as where you start. Some of your gatekeepers will be when those documents are being signed off. You want to gain support by educating your program and your executives and making them aware of what would happen in a misstep. So on this slide, we talk about operationalizing PIAs. Who does what within a privacy impact assessment? The first piece I want to talk about is what's called a threshold assessment. What this does is determine whether the initiative needs to be analyzed any further. In that case, a lot of time is at a question and answer phase. Asked of the businesses, are you collecting any of those specialized data elements that we may have already identified that make up PII or confidential information that we need to be concerned with from a privacy perspective? For example, it could be we're not going to be doing that. So if the answer is no, we're just going to be providing an application to make it easier for the public to access our public available services or website from a smartphone. Then you're done with that particular assessment. There's no reason to move any farther. But if for some of those answers they're yes, I'll show you the PIA tools later, but if the answer is yes, then you go back to the next stage, which is the intake process. What happens in the intake process is that the business unit either fills out and answers questions themselves, or they meet with the privacy folks in your organization and answers questions determining what you're doing with the information, how it's going to be managed. Do you have legitimate need to collect that particular PII or not, and have authorization? So that it's all done during a collection process, and that's called the intake process. The next piece, which is a lot more complicated, is a privacy analysis work that happens. That is where you're going to be looking at a particular initiative and you're either applying a compliance framework that your organization has adopted, or you're looking at identifying the riskiness of that particular information they are collecting, sharing, or processing. And usually this is done mostly by your privacy professionals or those with privacy training. Some organizations have groups outside the privacy office called privacy champions or privacy friends, and these folks are trained to spot privacy issues before they get too big in the business lines. So they're actually embedded with business. An example of some of these are your audit shop might be doing this process, or your project management office. And these are the times where you can start building these privacy resources in your organization to help educate them and be your eyes and ears out in the rest of the organization to spot privacy issues. But typically during the analysis, you've got people that are trained in privacy, that are looking at and identifying the risks, and also working with the security team to say, are there technical safeguards that can be used to mitigate some of the risks or not? Then you are developing some type of risk mitigation plan at the point that would get fed back into the privacy initiative. So of course we always get some pushback, and we get the next question. We're comfortable with those risks. We don't really need to mitigate them. This is where you're going to need to develop some kind of escalation process before you get to that point. So developing a governance structure for your privacy program and escalating those particular issues up so that the risks are raised. And lastly, you've got this approval process. Once all the risks that have been identified, either mitigation is going to be put in place or somebody has agreed to accept the risk from a governance area. And then there is the approval process, which includes circling back, making sure what was approved once the particular initiative goes live is actually done. That's why you're working with your, let's say, audit group or your project management group to ensure that what was agreed upon is implemented. That is kind of an overall look at the process of a privacy impact assessment. Tools. Organizations use many different tools to document and manage their PIA processes. In addition, they may take a compliance-based approach or a risk-based approach, depending upon the culture of the organization and the maturity of that organization. Here are some examples. This one is from the federal government. It's from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and they've had to do privacy impact assessments for quite a while now. This one is a U.S. tech company, and you'll see that they are collecting different pieces of data. This talks a lot about APIs. Tailor your PIA templates to your organization. This example, again, is from the Canadian Office of the Privacy Commissioner. Again, they're not just a tool, but can be used to help educate your business unit. Canada has done a lot of good work in this space, as well as Australia. Our federal government has been doing PIA since 2002. Here's an example of the Australian PIA template. So the PIA Lifecycle, you don't just monitor to the end of the project, but perhaps you go 1 year out. You'll want to provide these controls to the auditor who can audit the program, or if you have a program area that would be looking at those implementations and metrics for that area. If you are involved with privacy policies, this will feed into your privacy policy statement and statement on collection, and you'll want to follow up on those areas in addition to your change management process. And so with that, that's the end of this presentation. If you have any other questions, please feel free to contact the California Information Security Office.